Lord, thank you for bringing us together this morning to study your word. I ask that you guide our study and have us learn the lessons that you would teach us through it. We ask that you continue to bless us. We ask that you continue to watch over. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. So before we really start, we're going to go over a phrase most of us are probably familiar with. It is the apple didn't fall far from the tree. If you're familiar with that expression, usually it's when a kid, usually even a boy, does something that their parents or dad did before. And it can be used in a good way, but it usually is meant in a derogatory way. Usually if a child makes a mistake, and they'll say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree if his dad had already made a similar mistake. So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. What we're going to notice as we go into chapter 14 is Jonathan, the apple in this situation, does fall far from the tree. And that's through God's providence. So to bring us up to speed on where we're at right now, the Philistines are encamped at Michmash. They've just done a strong show of their force. All of the Hebrews are hiding in caves and wells. The Philistines are sending out raids to raid the Israelites. They're not in a full-blown war right now. I think for two reasons. Well, three reasons then. One, they're not in a full-blown war right now because God hasn't decided that it's time. Two, they're not in a full-blown war because the Philistines are still scared of Israelites' God. And the third reason is because the Israelites are scared of the Philistines. So there's a lot of different things going on right now. The Philistines aren't full out attacking the Israelites because they're scared of Yahweh. The Israelites are not attacking the Philistines because they're scared of the Philistines instead of trusting in the Lord that the Philistines are scared of. So we left off at the end of chapter 13. We learned there's only two swords in the entire nation of Israel, and those belong to Saul and Jonathan. Anybody else would have to defend themselves with plowshares or some sort of farm equipment. So it does make sense. They know they're militarily outnumbered, and they don't have a chance through their own power, which is why they're all hiding in caves, because they're all trusting in themselves and their own strength rather than God, which is how they ended up having a king to begin with. So everybody's hiding in caves, pits, holes. Saul, we'll find out, is at the pomegranate cave or tree. He's also in hiding. His people are taking after him. If we remember, Saul is he's back and forth between just being ruthless and arrogant and disobedient. Sometimes it seems like he's a good leader in the military. Other times it seems like he doesn't have a clue what he's doing. Right now is probably his most common feature, which is just kind of waiting around or hoping something good happens. So turning to 1 Samuel chapter 14, verse 1, we're going to look at the apple that fell far from the tree, which directly relates to what kind of character do we have. So when we talk about an apple and a tree, usually when we're comparing those things, we're comparing character traits, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing between that relate the apple to the tree. They're character traits. So what kind of character do we have? Verse 1 says, "One day Jonathan, the son of Saul, said to the young man who carried his armor, 'Come, let us go over to the Philistine garrison on the other side.' But he did not tell his father." So already it seems strange that Jonathan would want to do this without telling his dad, who is the king. But it also seems unlikely that Saul would have let him do this because Saul is generally a coward. Jonathan doesn't have that issue. So we see it's an act of valor by Jonathan to want to go over to the Philistine garrison while everybody else, all the other Hebrews, are hiding. Jonathan wants to go see what's going on over there. If we remember, last time in chapter 13, Jonathan already saw one Philistine garrison, and then he wiped it out with the Lord. And that's when Saul blew the trumpet and took the credit. Now they're at another Philistine garrison, and Jonathan kind of wants to see what's going on there. So verse 2, I'm sorry, here we go. Saul was staying in the outskirts of Gibeah in the pomegranate cave at Migron. The people who were with him were about 600 men. So last time Saul had how many with him? There was 2,000 with Saul and 1,000 with Jonathan. So they had 3,000 men that they kept behind for service, and now he's down to about 600. So as we know, Saul's kind of shaky, kind of scared. He's not going to like this, that his men that are around him are cut down to such a low number. But verse 3 is going to show us who some of these guys are. Verse 3 says, including Ahijah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the priest of the Lord in Shiloh, wearing an ephod. And the people did not know that Jonathan had gone. All right, so when Jonathan left, it was just him and his armor bearer. This was a covert op, right? But these names in verse 3, we're going to work backwards because it's telling us exactly who this is. If we remember at the beginning of 1 Samuel, when Eli was the priest, when Samuel was a very young boy, Eli had two worthless sons. It said two worthless sons. They stole the sacrifices to God, among other things that they did. And one of those worthless sons was Phinehas. And then on the day that God judged the house of Eli is when Phinehas, Eli and both of his sons, and one of them being Phinehas, all died on that same day. The sons both in battle by the sword. After that, the ark was taken, and Phinehas's wife, when she found out that the ark was taken, went into birth from the trauma, and she ended up dying during birth. But before she did, she named that child Ichabod, saying the glory has departed, which is what Ichabod means. That same Ichabod is the Ichabod in verse 3 here. Now, Ichabod's brother is who the focus of this is. Ichabod's brother was Ahitub. Ahitub's son was Ahijah. Ahijah is the one with Saul right now. Ahijah is the priest with Saul. This is a descendant of Eli. Now, that might start to raise some questions. Why is there a descendant of Eli that is a priest? So let's refresh ourselves. 1 Samuel chapter 2, when we went through that, starting at verse 27 says, and there came a man of God to Eli. So this was the unnamed prophet that came and told Eli what was going to happen. And this prophet says, thus says the Lord, did I indeed reveal myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt, subject to the house of Pharaoh? Did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest? Remember, he is talking about Levi the person, but he's also talking about the Levites, all of the descendants that came from him. This is the priesthood. So, did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to go up to my altar, to burn incense, to wear an ephod before me? I gave to the house of your father all my offerings by fire from the people of Israel. Why then do you scorn my sacrifices and my offerings that I commanded for my dwelling, and honor your sons above me by fattening yourselves on the choicest parts of every offering of my people Israel? Therefore the Lord, the God of Israel, declares, I promised that your house and the house of your father should go in and out before me forever. But now Yahweh declares, far be it from me, for those who honor me I will honor, and those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed. Behold, the days are coming when I will cut off your strength and the strength of your father's house, so that there will not be an old man in your house. Do you guys remember this? There will not be an old man in your house. Then in distress you will look with envious eye on all the prosperity that shall be bestowed on Israel, and there shall not be an old man in your house forever. The only one of you whom I shall not cut off from my altar shall be spared to weep his eyes out, to grieve his heart, and all the descendants of your house shall die by the sword of men. And this that shall come upon your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, shall be the sign to you. Both of them shall die on the same day. All right, so every part of that prophecy came true already, except there's still a descendant. Now, we have this descendant in chapter 14, Ahijah, and he is the descendant that it's talking about here. The one in verse 33, the only one of you whom I shall not cut off from my altar shall be spared to weep his eyes out, to grieve his heart, and all the descendants of your house shall die by the sword of men. Okay. We have a descendant. We'll find out. Every other part of the prophecy has already happened. Now, I will say this, that is not going to, it is going to happen. It's not going to happen in this chapter, but we need to be aware that this is still an ongoing thing. And we also need to be aware of the people that Saul is surrounding himself with. And we'll see more of that towards the end of the chapter. So back to chapter 14, verse 4. It says, within the passes by which Jonathan sought to go over to the Philistine garrison, there was a rocky crag on one side and a rocky crag on the other side. The name of this one was Bozez, and the name of that one was Sinah. The one crag rose on the north in front of Michmash, and the other on the south in front of Geba. All right. If we remember, Geba is the garrison that Jonathan already cleared out. Michmash is where the Philistines are holed up right now, that they're sending their raiding groups out of. Verse 6, Jonathan said to the young man who carried his armor, come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for nothing can hinder the Lord by saving by many or by few. And his armor bearer said to him, do all that is in your heart, do as you wish. Behold, I am with you, heart and soul. But Jonathan said, behold, we will cross over to the men, and we will show ourselves to them. If they say to us, wait until we come to you, then we will stand still in our place, and we will not go up to them. But if they say, come up to us, then we will go up, for the Lord has given them into our hand, and this shall be the sign to us. Okay, so we understand what's going on there. It's another Philistine garrison. So Jonathan's pretty excited, it seems like. It also seems like he's excited to display the glory of God again. So the Hebrews, remember, the rest of them are still being terrorized by the Philistines, and they're very scared. They're all hiding. They're in caves and wells, as we keep saying. They're running away. Some of them even ran away across the Jordan River, if we remember that. They're acting a lot like their leader, Saul, when Samuel found him hiding in the luggage, right? Jonathan is the apple that did fall far from the tree. He's not hiding anywhere. He has full trust in God. And we see that his armor bearer has full trust in him. What he says in that passage, we'll start off at the end of verse 6, where he says, come, let us go over to the garrison of these uncircumcised. They all know that they're Philistines, so why didn't he just call them Philistines? He's making a point here. And the point is, we are, Jonathan, the Hebrews, are the covenant people of God. They're the circumcised. These other people are not the covenant people of God. They're the uncircumcised. So his point is, let's go over to the people that are not Yahweh's people. So he points that out. As more of a not being concerned with the size and the military of these people, but being more concerned with who's their covenant with, and it's not with Yahweh. So I'm not worried. What we notice in verse 7, when his armor, or actually, let's stay in verse 6. Towards the end, it says, there's two very interesting things that John says, or that Jonathan says even after that. He says, it may be that the Lord will work for us. So Jonathan was not presumptuous, like we might hear people a lot say, God will do that. The Lord will do that. I promise. Well, unless you have received that word, that's a tough promise to make. Jonathan didn't make it. He said, it might be that the Lord will work for us, because he hadn't received that yet. And we're not promised that we're just going to be able to defeat every enemy. We're promised that we will be saved in the end. We're not promised we'll defeat every enemy. It may be that the Lord will work for us. But after he sends that maybe out, then we have a fact. For nothing can hinder the Lord from saving by many or by few. So Jonathan is sure of this. It doesn't matter how many people are in our camp or how many people are in their camp. Those things are irrelevant, because that doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is if the Lord's will is for this to happen. Jonathan understands that. His armor bearer is understanding what Jonathan's saying. And then we see that the deal is, if they tell us that they're going to come to us, then we'll just stay here and wait. But if they invite us up, we're going to go clean it out. Now, there is a third option in there. What if they say, what if they see them and then they don't say anything? Okay. So there's the faith of Jonathan in that passage is split up a couple different ways. We think of the obvious, which is if they invite us up, then we should go up. Verse 10 says, if they say, come up to us, then we'll go up, for the Lord has given them into our hand, and this will be the sign to us. But what's not written there that we can take out of it is also, if they don't invite us up and if they do come down to attack us, well, we're cool with that too. We'll just do the battle down here instead of over there, whatever it is. And then if they decide not to come or invite us, then, well, God's decided that there's not a battle today. But Jonathan is saying, we're going to do it this way, and we'll see which way the Lord wants it. And then we're going to do it that way. So he's ready for three different scenarios in this situation. So verse 11. So both of them, so not just Jonathan and his armor bearer, both of them showed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines, right? So they just popped out of the ground, the little hole in the ground that they're hiding in. They popped out, they showed themselves, they let themselves be seen by the Philistines, not scared. And the Philistines said, look, Hebrews are coming out of the holes where they have hidden themselves, right? So the Philistines are making fun of them. They understand that these guys are scared of those guys, right? And the men of the garrison hailed Jonathan and his armor bearer and said, come up to us and we will show you a thing or two. And Jonathan said to his armor bearer, come up after me, for the Lord has given them into the hand of Israel. Let's hang on there, right? The Philistines are mocking Jonathan and his armor bearer. Come up to us. We'll show you something, right? They're goading them on. Come up here, right? And Jonathan, knowing what that means, is pretty happy. He says, all right, this is go time. Tells his armor bearer, come up after me, for the Lord has given them into the hand of Israel. Jonathan no longer has any question on whether or not this battle is supposed to take place. He just got his sign and he knows it's God's will. He goes up there and attacks. But notice also, Jonathan, son of the king, says, come up after me. He does not say go up before me. He doesn't say start attacking those guys. I'm your boss. He says, come up after me. Do what I do, be as I be, right? We're going to go attack now. Verse 13. Then Jonathan climbed up on his hands and feet, and his armor bearer after him. And they fell, they here is the Philistines, they fell before Jonathan, and his armor bearer killed them after him. At that first strike, when Jonathan and his armor bearer made, killed about 20 men within as if it were half a furrow's length in an acre of land. So if we're not super familiar, this is not a large area. If we're talking about out towards the shelter house, we're talking about the size of the pond, right? Killed 20 guys, 20 Philistines that are in a garrison, fortified Philistines. Keep in mind, Jonathan has a sword. The other guy's the armor bearer. Okay. 20 Philistines in their garrison. That's pretty impressive. And I would argue that that is impossible without God. What it says at the end of that in verse 15, and there was a panic in the camp, you think? And in the field and among all the people. The garrison and even the raiders trembled. The earth quaked and it became a very great panic. So these tough guy Philistines that are pretty happy that the Hebrews are all hiding in caves and holes, and they called these two up to give them a hard time. And when they came up there, they just cleaned it out. And they noticed that there's a panic in the camp. I wonder where that came from, because that panic's also in the field. And it even says among all the people. It even says that the raiders trembled. So the three groups that the Philistines would send out to raid into the Hebrew territory, even those guys are shaken and scared. But then, the earth quaked. What? Okay. Well, we can explain pretty much everything right up until then. But when the earth quaked and it became a very great panic, we could say that there just so happened to be an earthquake at that place at that point in time. And that would be true. But it did just so happen that God caused that earthquake and that panic at that certain time. So verse 11 starts off, the Philistines are taunting Jonathan and his armor bearer. They're making fun of how the Hebrews are hiding in the caves. But Jonathan had faith that when he heard the Philistines call him up, that this battle belonged to God. And unlike Saul, Jonathan is not self-centered. He recognizes that this will benefit the entire nation. He said in verse, where was that? He says at the end of verse 12, the very end, when he's talking to his armor bearer, come up after me, for Yahweh has given them, the Philistines, into the hand of Israel. So he's not claiming this for himself, even though he's the one swinging the sword. He's claiming that this is a victory for the nation. He understands God is doing this for the people. So where verse 13, though, it's a little bit confusing, where it says that Jonathan, they fell before Jonathan and his armor bearer killed them after him. That could be a couple different ways. It could be that Jonathan killed the ones in the front and the armor bearer killed the ones coming from behind. That would make sense with 2 on however many were in the garrison. It could be that Jonathan wounded them to the point that they were laying on the ground and the armor bearer came through after and did what soldiers do to verify death. It could be either one. It's I believe, irrelevant for the passage. So they kill about 20 Philistines in the garrison. The rest tremble in fear. The ground quakes. Everybody panics. And the Israelites, up until now, have been too scared to fight the Philistines because they're so much larger, right? They're not all Goliaths. They're not all giants, but they are much larger people in general, all the way across the board. So the Israelites are scared, but as we talked about before, the Philistines are camped at Michmash because they're also scared, but they're scared of Israel's God, not the small people. It's not been that long ago that the Philistines captured the ark of that God. And they tried to do a lot of things to keep that so that they can hold Israel's God down, right? They put the Ark of the Covenant beside Dagon so that it would be a sign that our God has conquered your God. And then what happened? Dagon couldn't even stay standing up, right? And then everybody starts breaking out with tumors and there's rats everywhere. There's plagues going around all the Philistine cities. All this happened because they thought they were cute with the Ark. So they understand the power of the God that owns that Ark and that is with these people. They understand that. So why do they continue to attack the Israelites? It doesn't make sense. It's the same reason that now people fight against God constantly. It's the same reason. They didn't then, and people don't want to now, submit to God's authority. Also, keep in mind that there's spiritual implications. A lot of these Old Testament passages, and I believe even right now, are describing a spiritual war that's going on in the background that some of these characters are aware of and some aren't. Just like us when we're reading, it feels like we may or may not pick up on certain things and they may or may not even be there. But there are spiritual implications, at least anyways, to the fights. The enemy knows that the Messiah has to come from the seed of Israel. With him knowing that, he is going to do everything to attack all of the Israelites, all through history, all of the Hebrew people. He needs to stop it from happening at all costs. Human lives are irrelevant because anybody that dies during this struggle, the enemy has victory over anyways. So he doesn't care about that. He'll use as many human lives as possible, throwing people at each other to try to accomplish this, destroying Israel. Some could argue that this is still happening now. So the loss of human life is just a bonus for the enemy. So he'll even give up the anointed to be crucified to stop it from happening, right? the devil himself entered Judas, right, to betray Jesus. So he'll do whatever to try to make to make salvation impossible. He thought by sacrificing Jesus or by murdering Jesus, Satan thought that was the victory. God's playing chess, right? This is the expression, one's playing chess, the other's playing checkers. Satan ran right into God's plan, as God knew he would, by ordering the murder of Jesus, because that was the key. That is the key. That had to happen. And Paul touched on that in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Paul says, starting at verse 6, "Yet among the mature, we do impart wisdom, although it is not a wisdom of this age or of the rulers of this age who are doomed to pass away." This age is right now. The age he's talking about is the age we're in. Verse 7, "But we impart a secret and hidden wisdom of God, which God decreed before the ages for our glory." What's that mean? That means before the ages, before people. The plan was in place. We're not on plan B. Some people say we're on plan B because Jesus got crucified. That's plan A. Some people say we're in plan B because Adam sinned. That's plan A. Maybe plan B because the flood. That's still plan A. We're still on the original plan. God knows all things, real and possible, everything that has happened, will happen, and could have happened. Okay. It's all been planned for ahead of time. So when he says God decreed this before the ages for our glory, he's saying that this was the original plan, still going for all time, so that we might get salvation. Verse 8, "None of the rulers of this age understood this," right? Who are the rulers he's talking about? Herod, Pilate, these guys, right? They didn't understand this. Paul says, "For if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory." Fact, right? If they knew what they were doing, they wouldn't have done it. But they were being led that direction. Satan's pushing everything that direction. He's getting the crowd pumped up. They're demanding the crucifixion. But if he would have known, he would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But it had to happen. Verse 9, Paul says, "But as it is written, what no eye has seen, nor ear heard, nor the heart of man imagined, what God has prepared for those who love him." This had to happen so that verse 9 could happen. The crucifixion had to happen so that what God has prepared for those who love him could happen. So sometimes the storm has to happen before the calm. Okay? So what the enemy wanted the most, the death of Jesus, was exactly what God declared before the ages. And some people look at it like a back and forth struggle, right? Good and evil always fighting back and forth. That's not Christianity. That is Eastern religion. In Buddhism, yin yang, whatever else. That's not Christianity. The Lord could, and we're told in Revelation, will destroy the enemy with a word, right? Or a thought. It's not, he doesn't have to fight, right? The same God that speaks everything into existence can just as easily snap everything out. Satan, demons, everything. So this will happen. Matthew in chapter 10, verse 28 says, "Do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell." It's like Jonathan already read Matthew. He is not concerned a bit about these Philistines. No, he's concerned about God getting glory and the nation being saved through what he's doing, right? 1 Samuel chapter 14, verse 16. "And the watchmen of Saul in Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and behold, the multitude was dispersing here and there." So that's telling us if Saul had, while he's at the pomegranate cave and he has watchmen, Saul's full on in hiding, right? He has 600 men with him to protect him while he hides. So the watchmen are watching, and they see the multitude dispersing here and there. Verse 17, "Then Saul said to the people who were with him, 'Count and see who's gone out from us.' And when they counted, behold, Jonathan and his armor bearer were not there. So Saul said to Ahijah, the priest, bring the ark of God here. Some translations might say bring the ephod of God here. And I think that is the accurate way, as we're going to find out later in the chapter. But either way, maybe the ephod was in the ark at this point. I'm not sure. Either way, the ephod's going to come out in a little bit. It says, for the ark of God went at that time with the people of Israel. So Saul sees the Philistines scattering. He finds out that Jonathan and his armor bearer are missing. So he tells the priest, which is Ahijah, the descendant of Eli, he tells Ahijah to bring the ark or bring the ephod after he sees all this going on. So Saul wants to inquire of God what to do. This is good. This is smart, right? Saul made a good decision. He wants to ask God what to do. That's a good thing so far. Then we get verse 19. And it says, now while Saul was talking to the priest, right? The priest is inquiring of God of what to do. Now, while Saul was talking to the priest, the tumult in the camp of the Philistines increased more and more. So Saul said to the priest, withdraw your hand, right? So Saul wants guidance from God, but as soon as he gets distracted, he doesn't want guidance from God anymore. He wants, take your hand off. It's time to go. Right? He tells the priest, stop, withdraw your hand. This is not something can we find anywhere else in scripture where the priest is told to stop talking to God so somebody can go into battle? This is ridiculous. It would be one thing if this was a civilian, just a normal guy. We have the king of Israel, the king that replaced in God's eyes his place. Right? God's supposed to be the king. He's upset that these people demanded a king. So that he gave him Saul. And now Saul, who is working in God's place for the people, is now inquiring of God, but then deciding, not really worth the trouble. Let's just go do it. Right? So he might have done it out of fear. Or with Saul and his arrogance, he might have saw that the Philistines were running and that the battle was being won without him, and his pride got involved. And he said, okay, stop. I need to go to, get my glory out of this. He's not concerned with God's glory. He is concerned with his own glory. It's a fine line where, we're at the point where it seems like Saul, at least here, is genuinely trying to do right, but he's doing right in his own eyes. He's doing right Book of Judges style. He's doing what he thought was good in his own eyes instead of relying on God. He had the right idea by inquiring of God. He had the wrong idea by stopping that so that he could do what's right in his own eyes. It's also, does that describe us? Would we ask God for guidance and then either out of fear, maybe we get scared, or maybe out of maybe it's pride to want to claim a victory of our own, whatever it is that we decide to stop looking for God's guidance for so that we can go accomplish whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish. So it's maybe the answer is taken too long. Maybe we ask God for guidance and just haven't gotten an answer, and it's taken too long. And we're like Saul, when he said to Samuel, "You didn't come within the 7 days. You didn't, I waited as long as I could, and then, I felt like I would just do what was right." Right. But Saul doing what was right in his own eyes was the same thing as Saul saying, I felt like what I thought was right was better than what God had already said. So I decided to do my thing instead. And it can be easy for us it is very easy to see Saul's error. It can be easy for us to judge Saul himself, and we shouldn't do that because we make the same errors. What we should do, though, is judge Saul's actions, not the person, but the actions. And his actions are reprehensible. But we let the Lord judge Saul. I truly have no idea where Saul ended up. God judges him. We can judge the actions. That's what we're supposed to learn from Saul is the actions. Judge the actions, not the person. It takes us to verse 20. Then Saul and all the people who were with him rallied and went into the battle. And behold, every Philistine's sword was against his fellow, and there was a very great confusion. Well, this is interesting. We've seen this happen a couple times before. We're going to see it happen a bunch of times later on with different groups. These guys are fighting themselves. They must not know battle, except if we remember, the Philistines do know battle. They are the war people. They are the war people. That's what they do. Fight is what they do. So it's not like they forgot what they were doing, or not like they got confused all on their own. The Lord put them into that confusion. And since the Philistines made sure that the Israelites didn't have any weapons, the Lord made sure the Philistines used their weapons on each other. You know, the Israelites don't need swords for all the Philistines to still die by the sword. That's interesting. Verse 21, now the Hebrews who had been with the Philistines, what? Some of the Hebrews were so scared that instead of running away, the Philistines will just catch us, that they actually deserted the Israelites and joined the Philistines. Right? That's what that's saying. Verse 21. But what's it say then? Now the Hebrews who had been with the Philistines before that time, who had gone up with them into the camp. So some of them Hebrews that deserted were actually just about to invade Israel. They were joined and in the camp. But it says after that comma that even they also turned to be with the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. So we see that the soldiers are fighting just like their leader. They actually joined the Philistines until they saw that the victory was won. Then they came out and rejoined the Israelites. Kind of how Saul was hiding with his 600 men until the battle was won. And then he came out, while Jonathan was relying on God. Verse 22, likewise, when all the men of Israel who had hidden themselves in the hill country of Ephraim heard that the Philistines were fleeing, they too followed hard after them in battle. Okay, well, all the cowards are out now. That's good. And now they're chasing the Philistines, and that's even better. Verse 23, so the Lord saved Israel that day, not Jonathan, not Saul. So Yahweh saved Israel that day. And the battle passed beyond Beth-aven. So it's not an accident that it says the Lord saved Israel that day. But this is the interesting point in the chapter where it takes kind of a turn. This chapter is kind of two chapters in one. Up till now has been the front half. It's a little bit darker in the second half, but there's a lot of value to it. So we go on. And the men of Israel had been hard pressed that day. So Saul had laid an oath on the people, saying, cursed be the man who eats food until it is evening, and I am avenged on my enemies. So none of the people had tasted food. So and I didn't put a map up for this, but there's miles and miles between these two places that the Israelites without weapons are chasing the Philistines and killing them in battle. And they're chasing them for miles. The Philistines are trying to retreat back to a further camp. The Israelites that are catching up with them are killing them. It's a long day. It's a long day to be, it's not like they had prepared for this battle. Everybody was just in hiding. Jonathan and his armor bearer went up and cleared out the garrison, but nobody was ready for this full scale battle, except Jonathan and his armor bearer. They didn't mind it at all. Everybody else not ready. So the entire day they're chasing, they're fighting, and then the king says, re-energize, lay down, take a rest for 5 minutes, get your legs back under you, get a drink of water, get something to eat, get your energy back. No, he says, cursed is the man who eats food until it's evening, and I am avenged on my enemies. If we compare that to how Jonathan talked, it was these uncircumcised. It's these people that are not under God's covenant, that refuse the Lord. They are going to be handed over to Israel, to our nation, by the Lord. Everything is about advancing the kingdom. Saul is about advancing his own glory. Until I am avenged on my enemies. Who's Saul in this? It's hard. He's very arrogant in this. It is a ridiculous thing to keep food away from soldiers that are fighting all day. It just doesn't make sense. Earthly speaking, if the Lord had ordained this, then that's a good thing. But Saul clearly he's losing his mind right now, and it's going to become more obvious. He wants personal revenge when he's actually in a holy war, a spiritual war. He's in that and doesn't realize it. He just wants personal revenge for his own glory. But God doesn't matter or doesn't necessarily care who the different pieces on the chessboard are. They're going to get moved to where he wants it. Okay, he knows what moves are coming. It's Saul can do his thing and God can still work with it. Verse 25. Now when all the people came to the forest, behold, there was honey on the ground. And when the people entered the forest, behold, the honey was dropping. But no one put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath, right? Saul just told him, anybody that eats until evening is cursed. So nobody's eating because they don't want to be cursed. Verse 27, but Jonathan didn't hear his father charge the people with the oath. So he put out the tip of his staff that was in his hand and dipped it in the honeycomb and put his hand to his mouth, and his eyes became bright. Jonathan got a little sugar rush from that honey. And it was not a bad idea. It was a good thing. Verse 28. Then one of the people said, your father strictly charged the people with an oath, saying, cursed be the man who eats food this day. And the people were faint. Then Jonathan said, my father has troubled the land. See how my eyes have become bright because I tasted a little of this honey? Okay, so we learned two different things from that verse, or from those two verses. One, the curse was fake. We can see there's no curse because Jonathan actually benefited from eating the honey without knowing about there being a so-called curse. The other thing is when Jonathan said, my father troubled the land, that word that's used for trouble, we can overlook it. It seems like a throwaway, but it's the same word when we studied the book of Joshua, when Achan stole what was devoted to destruction. They were supposed to destroy everything when they had made an attack in the book of Joshua, and Achan stole it and he hid it under his tent, right? That same troubled was the troubled that described what Achan did. Okay. It's the same word. It's not our general trouble. Like I did something wrong and I got into trouble. That's not what this one is. This one is that one. Okay. So what Saul did trouble the land, just like what Achan did troubled the land. In fact, it's I have it here, Joshua chapter 7, verse 25. It says, why did you bring trouble on us? The Lord brings trouble on you today. And all Israel stoned him with stones, and they burned them with fire and stoned them with stones. That's trouble. That is the trouble that Saul has brought on the land. 1 Samuel 14:30. How much better if the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies that they found. For now, the defeat among the Philistines has not been great. So we see Jonathan knew that the Philistines would have been wiped out if they were allowed to eat and fight and keep their energy up and go. Through the providence of God, Saul made a stupid oath that kept that from happening. But the consequence of that happening is now there's still Philistines to fight. There would have been a much better victory except for Saul's oath. Verse 31, they struck down the Philistines that day from Michmash to Aijalon, and the people were very faint. And then at the end of verse 31, we find out, well, we're not told directly yet, but now it's nighttime. At the end of verse 31, boom, it's evening. Verse 32, the people pounced on the spoil and took sheep and oxen and calves and slaughtered them on the ground, and the people ate them with the blood. So the oath was only till nighttime. Now it's nighttime. So as soon as they could, the people started killing and eating. That makes sense. They're hungry. They're starving. They're faint. But they're eating right there on the ground with the blood. So we have a violation of God's law. And it's been told to us over and over and over, you cannot eat the blood, right? So these people that went all day, very careful not to disobey the orders of the king, immediately disobeyed the law of God when the orders of the king expired. So their loyalties in question. They don't have any regard for following the law of God. And we can struggle with that too. Sometimes we might be told, you have to do, a tradition, keep this tradition, do this thing that this guy said. When in fact, it might go directly against what God said. And it seems like the more traditions that we might look at, the more we might see how anti-biblical those traditions might be. We got to compare our traditions with Scripture. Traditions are good if they align with Scripture, but not if they disagree with Scripture, as they often do. Verse 33. Then they told Saul, behold, the people are sinning against the Lord by eating with the blood. So they know what's going on, right? They're sinning against the Lord by eating with the blood. And he said, you have dealt treacherously. Well, okay, Saul's back on a good track here. They have dealt treacherously. He's right. And then roll a great stone to me here. Wonder what Saul's doing. Verse 34. And Saul said, disperse yourselves among the people and say to them, let every man bring his ox or his sheep and slaughter them here and eat. And do not sin against the Lord by eating with the blood. This is good. Saul's done a good thing. So every one of the people brought his ox with him that night, and they slaughtered them there. And Saul built an altar to the Lord. It was the first altar he built to the Lord. So now Saul, he is concerned about offending God, which is why he built the altar and told everybody to kill the animals up there so the blood can drain. He's concerned about offending the Lord. He did not have that concern when he interrupted the priest who was inquiring of God so that he could go into battle to get his glory. He didn't have any concern about offending God then, but now he does. The battle's won, which is all he's concerned with is did I get my glory? Verse 36, then Saul said, let us go down after the Philistines by night and plunder them until the morning light. Let us not leave a man of them alive. And they said, do whatever seems good to you. But the priest said, let us draw near to God here. Okay, so Saul is about to get reckless again. Why? He wants more glory. Let's go finish cleaning out the Philistines. I can get so much more glory off of that. And the priest, I assume this is still a Ahijah here, chimes in with maybe some smart counsel. Let us draw near to God here, right? Saul, king, verse 37, and Saul inquired of God, shall I go down after the Philistines? Will you give them into the hand of Israel? But the Lord did not answer him that day. Okay. Now, sometimes we might ask God for guidance, like we talked about before. And sometimes God might answer us that day, and sometimes he might not answer us that day. Saul got one of those not answers that day. So, verse 38, Saul said, come here, all you leaders of the people, and know and see how this sin has arisen today. Saul knows that the reason God is not answering is because there is sin in the camp, and Saul's right. And he wants to find out where that sin's at. What Saul doesn't realize is that the sin in the camp is his. Now, by lot, Jonathan is going to be chosen, but it'll be clear that the sin is Saul's. So Saul knows God is not answering because of sin. Verse 39. For as the Lord lives, this is Saul speaking, for as the Lord lives who saves Israel, even if it's in Jonathan, my son, he shall surely die. So we don't know. That's a tricky verse. We don't know if Saul had an inkling that Jonathan was responsible, that he was the one that ate the honey, or if Saul was saying it's so ridiculous that whoever did this, even if it's my son, they're going to die. Okay, we're not sure. But we do know the second half of that verse, but there was not a man among all the people who answered him. Well, there's at least a group of them that know that Jonathan is the one that ate honey. They saw him. They told him about the oath afterwards. But nobody's given him up to Saul, who wants to kill whoever did this. Verse 40. Then Saul, said to all Israel, "You shall be on one side, and I and Jonathan my son will be on the other side." And the people said to Saul, "Do what seems good to you." So Saul is using the Urim and the Thummim, if we remember that. These are kept in the priest's ephod, and that's how they would cast lots. That's what's going on here. So Saul splits it up. Saul and Jonathan are by themselves. The rest of the leaders of the nation are by themselves, and they're casting lots to see who's guilty. Verse 41, therefore Saul said, "O Lord God of Israel, why have you not answered your servant this day? If this guilt is in me or in Jonathan my son, O Yahweh God of Israel, give Urim. But if this guilt is in your people Israel, give Thummim." And Jonathan and Saul were taken, but the people were spared. Then Saul said, "Cast the lot between me and my son Jonathan." And Jonathan was taken. Then Saul said to Jonathan, "Tell me what you have done." Notice Saul did not say, "Did you do something?" Because even Saul knows that if it comes up in holy lot, you don't need to ask if, you just ask what. It's the same thing that happened in the book of Joshua. And Jonathan told him, "I tasted a little honey with the tip of the staff that was in my hand. Here I am, I will die." And Saul said, "God, do so to me and more also. You shall surely die, Jonathan." So Saul has just pronounced the execution of his son, Jonathan, who just led this great victory, because he tasted honey, which broke an oath that he didn't know about. So if not for the faith of Jonathan, all of these people, Saul included, would still be hiding in their caves and still be in fear of the Philistines. But now, because Jonathan broke an oath that he did not know about, his father, the king, wants to kill him and has in fact already pronounced the judgment. God, do so to me and more also. That is as pronounced as it gets. The decision's been handed down. Verse 45. Then the people said to Saul, "Shall Jonathan die, who has worked this great salvation in Israel? Far from it. As Yahweh lives, there shall not one hair of his head fall to the ground, for he has worked with Yahweh this day." So the people ransomed Jonathan so that he did not die. Then Saul went up from pursuing the Philistines, and the Philistines went to their own place. Well, that's kind of a thud, right? That's kind of a weird ending. It seems like there was this giant buildup, and then Saul demands the execution because he has to find out who cost him this great victory. He finds out it's his son, but his pride is still there, so he has to still demand that execution because it cost him his boost to his pride from the victory. But after the people basically rebel against the king in saying, "We're not delivering him to die. He's the one that led the victory." Then Saul knows he's not getting the glory anyways for this victory. And then he went up from pursuing. He just stopped the fight altogether. He no longer chased the Philistines. He just went up. And then the Philistines went to their place. Saul went to his place. The Philistines went to their place. Sorry about all the miscommunication, guys. I don't want to imply that they were friends after that, but the battle stopped there, assumingly because of Saul's hurt feelings. So we find out in that section there, verses 45 and 46, that the people, through God's providence, they saved Jonathan from death the same way that Jonathan saved them. Right? They showed good character 3 ways. 1, they didn't sell out Jonathan when Saul was trying to figure out what it was that happened to begin with. 2, they were actually correct that they agreed to go along with the king. Until 3, the king went against the law of God. Then they rebelled, and then they ransomed Jonathan. Okay, so they did that stuff correctly. Verse 47, and in finishing. When Saul had taken the kingship over Israel, he fought against all his enemies on every side, against Moab, against the Ammonites, against Edom, and against the kings of Zobah. and against the Philistines. Wherever he turned, he routed them. And he did valiantly and struck the Amalekites and delivered Israel out of the hand of those who plundered them. Now the sons of Saul were Jonathan, Ishvi, and Malchishua. Ishvi, I believe, is going to have 2 or 3 different names. I believe that's also Ishbosheth that we'll read about later. And that maybe this is a shortened nickname. But to finish, and the names of his 2 daughters were these. The name of the firstborn was Merib, and the name of the younger was Michael, or Michael, or Michelle. And the name of Saul's wife was Ahinoam, the daughter of Ahimaaz. And the name of the commander of his army was Abner, the son of Ner, Saul's uncle. That name will keep coming up. So this is Abner, son of Ner, Saul's uncle. So Saul's cousin is what it could say, Abner. Abner will continue for a long time. Verse 51, Kish was the father of Saul, and Ner, the father of Abner, was the son of Abiel. There was hard fighting against the Philistines all the days of Saul. And when Saul saw any strong man or valiant man, he attached himself to him. So you can't really blame Saul for that. That does make sense. Anytime a king sees somebody that's a good soldier, they might want to bring them as close as possible. And we'll see that certainly with David coming up. So this last section between verses 45 and 52, there's a lot of different people. Most of them play a lot of different parts as we move forward. But what we need to keep an eye on is the character of these different people. And sometimes the character might be different, sometimes good, sometimes bad, depending on who they're around, there's a lesson in that for us also, right? If our character is changing depending on who we're around, then we're as wrong as they were. As I'm sure anybody over the age of 10 has heard, character is how you act when nobody is around. That's character. And God sees that. God sees to the heart, it says. So it's important for us to maintain our character regardless of who we're around. We lean on scripture for that. We need to make sure, at least, probably in almost every area, but especially in this area, we need to make sure that we are not like Saul, or even the Hebrew people at the end of this battle. They're more concerned about the rules of men than they are the law of God. Right? They waited the whole day, starving, going through battle, risking death, the whole day without eating because of what their earthly king said. And then as soon as the battle's over, they break the law of the real king. Didn't give a second thought to it, right? So we need to make sure we're not like them in that way. We need to be more like Jonathan and trust God completely. And that's where we'll stop today.